In New England, we get a lot of nor'easters. That will be the topic of this lesson. Oddly enough, people don't really know what a nor'easter technically is, even though we see a lot of them. So let's go through the basics first. Remember in one of our earlier lessons, we talked about what storms are? Areas of low pressure, lousy weather. That's all a nor'easter is, an area of low pressure. But there are some specific guidelines that that area of low pressure has to meet in order to be a nor'easter. So the nor'easters get their strength from a clash of cold air coming in from Canada and warm, moist air surging up from the Gulf of Mexico. That temperature clash, again, is the energy source of these storms. Usually that clash happens just off of our coastline, and that's another requirement for a nor'easter. We have to have a wind coming in out of the northeast. Remember again from that earlier lesson, winds around areas of low pressure move counterclockwise. So if the storm center is located, let's say, near Nantucket, you get a northeasterly wind through most of New England. That's your nor'easter right there. When you get the storm offshore from the clash of cold and warm air, and a strong northeasterly wind blows across New England. Now, there's actually nothing that says a nor'easter has to bring snow. Sometimes people think a nor'easter automatically means snow. No, usually you get that clash of cold and warm air during the cold season, so yes, very often it has snow, but it's not a requirement. Sometimes we can get nor'easters as early as October. Of course, we get them during the winter, and sometimes they happen as late as March or April. Sometimes they are just rain across New England. It just really depends on what the temperature is. So, you have to have the clash of cold and warm air. You have to have the northeasterly wind. Those are the only two requirements for a nor'easter. Now, in addition to seeing rain, snow, strong winds that can bring down trees and power lines, another calling card with nor'easters is very often coastal flooding because you have that northeasterly wind. So, if a nor'easter hits at a time where the tide is already high, you throw on an angry sea, you can get a lot of that flooding. Places like Hull, Scituate, Revere, and Lynn, and Gloucester, down on the Cape and the Islands. This coastal flooding is very often one of the more significant impacts of a nor'easter. The record highest high tide ever recorded in Boston occurred during one of these nor'easters just a couple of years ago. In 2018, that storm brought in enough water and enough wind where the tide level just beat out the high tide that occurred during the benchmark blizzard of 1978. So these nor'easters can really mean business, and coastal flooding is very often one of the big impacts.